basics with a little bit more depth to those basics. Most of you, if you've ever played a sport, you know how important it is to get back to the basics and how good it is for the foundation of what you're doing as an athlete. Well, here we're going back to a little bit of the foundation of what the gospel is about. So, I'll give you a little background into Romans. As we go into Romans, Paul is writing. We've read a lot of letters about Paul, but I think it's great as we continue to learn and grow as a Christian to see what it looks like as a congregation, as a church, as a Christian. But today we're going to go into Romans and we're going to see what Paul has to say to the church in Rome. This is a church he hasn't really had the chance to really talk to much. He wants to go visit them and hasn't gotten there yet in this. But he tells them some truths, and this is an interesting church because while some of what Paul is writing to might be a specific Jew or a specific Gentile, the church in Rome is a group that is made up of all Gentiles and Jews, people who were non-believers in God and those who believed in God before hearing about Christianity, who were the Jews, and then of course the Gentiles who did not believe in a God. They all made up this congregation. And so this is an interesting group that Paul is talking to, and he's very encouraged by being able to speak to them. Now I know in the program it mentions, or the bulletin, it mentions how we're going from 18 to 23 today. I will start off in verse 17 because I think it gives some context of what we're going into this. So, Paul begins in 17. If you have a Bible, feel free to pull it out. It is going to start off in chapter 1. I'm going to start in 17 and then go into 18. I'm actually going to stop at 19, talk about it, go into 20 like I usually do. So, start in verse 17. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed, from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who are by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. So I want to stop right there. And those previous, even if you want to go back to 16, what you're going to see in the earliest part of Romans here, Paul wants to share with them the importance of sharing the gospel, the importance of what this gospel's for and who it's for. He wants to make sure it's not just to the Greek or the Jew. He wants to make sure that it's not just to me or not just to you, but it is for everyone, because it is for the righteousness of God. It's to show the righteousness of God, because it is I love the way it puts it in 16 too. It says, it is the power of God for salvation. That this gospel that is being preached is for everyone to understand that, look, this is for salvation. And he's going to start going into why we need a salvation. Why do we need this appeasing from God? Why is it that you need to worry about what might come? And this is some of the things we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks. What we're going to dive into today in Romans 1, and then we'll get into 2 and 3, is really look at what sin is. What is sin? Why does it matter? And why does it hurt us? So he starts off in 18. He says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men. So it talks about this idea that there is wrath. God has wrath from heaven towards all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. So what does this consist of? Ungodliness, unrighteousness. Well, this is ultimately what we're going to find out later is sin. But God being a perfect being, God being in heaven completely righteous, completely perfect, completely holy, must of course have wrath and judgment upon what is not godly, what is not righteous. What does that tend to be? Well, sin. And as we see, he has that towards men, women, people of all types. To the Jew and to the Greek, to the white, to the black, to the, you name it. If they sin, God has wrath towards it. So it says, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So this idea that because they have this unrighteousness, they even go so far as to completely deny what is true. And what is true, it says, for what can be made known about God is plain to them. This is the truth that they're denying, that God is plain to be seen for everyone. That what they're going to get into is there is no excuse. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. This is in verse 20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. So he says, these people, regardless, whoever they are at this point, have no excuse for why they deny God, why they deny an existence of God. Because since the beginning of time, God has made it plain throughout the world that there is a God, that there is a nature. If you ever want to get into apologetics, you can always Google it, Christian apologetics. Make sure you put that there. But what that is it is the argument for why God exists. And what you're going to find, though, is through a lot of apologetics is ultimately that there are a lot of arguments without even getting into the Bible yet for the existence of a God. The reasoning behind the universe, that there is a God. And it continues to point out that these people that he's referring to have suppressed that truth. That they have decided, you know what, we're going to go a different way. So he points out after the creation of the world, and the things have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, in verse 21, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So he points out that even the ones who did know God, even the ones who did know the idea of God, they didn't care. They didn't honor God. They didn't care about God. They went their own way. We see that in the Old Testament. We see whenever he comes to Noah, he says, look, these people have sinned. These people, have continued to sin wickedly, and that their sin was unceasing. That they continued to want to go their own way. They continued caring about what they wanted to care about, and they put God second. They cared more about what they wanted. They put God second, and it continued to happen over and over throughout the Old Testament. And he points out here that it continues to happen, that there is no excuse, though, that regardless, it is still sin, it is still unrighteousness, and God's wrath is still upon it. I love how it continues to go in verse 22. I love how he starts explaining how their foolish hearts were darkened, how they continued to sin, how they continued to go down this road. He points out they claimed to be wise, even though they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. So ultimately what they ended up doing was they put something in place of God. They ended up saying, this is valuable to me. God, you can be second. I'm going to put this up here because this is more important to me right now. So Paul is warning against this, that these people are out there, these people exist, and guess what? This message that he is telling to this church, this message they know of is important for everyone because everyone goes down this road. Everyone is a sinner. Everyone is broken. We're going to see that as we continue to go throughout Romans 2 and 3, that all fall short of the glory of God. But what we need to make sure we understand is what happens by falling short. Paul is addressing this right here. He says the wrath of God is revealed. The wrath of God is upon them. The wrath of God is going to be upon them. Ultimately, where this is all going and what he's sharing with them is that, look, the wrath of God is upon the unrighteous. The wrath of God is upon the ungodly. And as he will continue later on in Romans to point out that guess what? Everyone apart from God is ungodly. Everyone apart from God is going to experience the wrath of God. This is where we get hell. That is what hell is. It's experiencing the wrath of God for eternity. So he tells them this because Romans is going to be a long, drawn-out letter that establishes the basis of Christianity. It establishes what you need to know going down that road. And and how you can prepare for it and why you need to know these things and so on. But the question is, why is it important to us? You can come to church every day, you can hear sermons every day, and guess what? If it's not important, what's it matter? You're wasting your time. It's important because while we may not necessarily make animals our God, while we may not necessarily put a statue in place of God, our heart every day wants to choose something that's contrary to God. It wants to put something in the place of God. One of the 10 Commandments I always thought that I probably did well at before really understanding the Bible was, I put no other gods before God. Right? That's the first commandment. Put no other gods before me. He says he's a jealous God. How many times, though, in your life have you decided to take something up and do it, whether it be something you know is wrong? Every time we do something that goes contrary to what the Bible says, every time that we lie, cheat, or steal, every time that we make a decision that puts me above someone else in a way that was immoral, a way that might have been wrong, in a way that wasn't showing love, it's showing that I care more about me than what God teaches. If God tells you to love God, love your neighbor, every time then that you don't love your neighbor, you're ultimately saying, well, I'm more important, or whatever the circumstance may be. All I'm saying is, going back to this, is the Bible continues to lay out these ideas of how we are to live as Christians, and every time we disobey them, we're finding an excuse to do it. We're finding an excuse to say this is better, whether I'm better, whether that's more fun, that's more pleasurable to do than God, than to know God, than to follow God, than to care about God. You're putting that above God. And here's the thing. What does the Bible tell us that's going to happen because of that? Well, without God, it leads to wrath of God. It leads to hell. So my first question and application I want you to think about is this. First off, when Paul writes this to these people, one thing I want you to see and ask yourself in this is, are you any better? Are you any better off than what's being written right here? Do you ignore God? Do you put him off from the things you do? Do you say, well, these things are more important, and I'll put God over here in a little box, and he will be my every Sunday God, and I'll talk about him, and I'll do some things here and there, but I really don't love him. We talked about today in Sunday school, we talked about this idea of confessing, knowing in your heart and confessing God. This idea that he is so important to you that the emotions flare up, that you want to talk about him. But guess what? By talking about him, what you're doing is you're making him the center of your life. You actually care about him. You actually want to know more about him. That's putting God where God needs to be. Most of you probably have kids, and I love this example because I've watched my own mom be proud of me over the years. I've seen her talk with other people about me. Most of you, as you have kids, and you end up wanting to talk about them because you care about them, right? You love them. And I'm not saying this bad. I'm saying this great. I'm glad you love them. But I'm using this as an example to show something. How often do you talk about your kids to other people? I'm sure at some point you bring it up. You say, well, so-and-so's doing this, and they're good at it. In your eyes, sometimes they can do no wrong, or they might be really good at a sport, or whatever it might be. That, let's be honest, every parent probably has a picture of their child that is better than who they really are, right? If your parents don't see you as a good person, then you know what? There's probably an issue. I'm saying this to go into the fact, though, that emotion you have towards them is so overwhelming and almost to a point of a passion. Because they're your kids, you're proud of them. But then again, how often do you see that passion, that excitement for who God is? So, with that, I'm going into the whole point is your thinking of who God is. Is your thinking of life, is it all pointless? Are you going down a road that actually matters? Because the reason why the Bible, as we look at it here, and he claims that these people who go down these roads apart from God are fools, because what they don't realize is though they can do all the things they want. They can go down these roads, be excited they want, do everything that makes them happy. But what they don't realize is it's a waste. It's not going to get them anywhere. It's not going to matter. Because at the end of it, when they're dead and gone, they're in hell. Their life eventually gets faded into the history books. And it doesn't matter. We were listening to a song coming to church, and the idea is it points out that it talks about how in the world we're taught to make a name for yourself. And the whole point it goes into is the only name that matters is Jesus. Because as we see, that's the name that continues to repeat over and over throughout history. That we're still here 2,000 years after he was born, died, and was resurrected, and we're still talking about him. Because God is what matters. And so I say all this to point the picture of where your heart is. Where's your passion? Do you actually care about God? Do you actually want to know more about God? Do you actually try to put him first? And if you haven't, then that's where we're going to come to. That's what we're going to talk about right now. Because you can get as deep as you want. We can talk about as much as you want about the Bible and everything here. But the problem is if you don't get the basics, if you don't understand the importance that one, you are a sinner, and two, you need a Savior, and what Jesus did on the cross, everything else is pointless. Just talk to the Jews. The Jews lived thousands of years, got to a point where they continued to add laws to what they were supposed to do and believe. And even to the point when Jesus finally came up and started talking and sharing his ministry and sharing who God was, they were so blind they didn't even see that it was God. It was the promise they had been waiting for. Because they were missing the point. It wasn't about making much of self. It was about making much of God. So, to go into this, what is the basics of Christianity? And what is going to go down this road? And what is Paul always referencing back to? Well, Jesus Christ. The reason that's so important is because this is the center of the gospel. This is what everything comes down to. This is the top of the mountain right before it starts going downhill. This is the most important piece of the Bible. The crucifixion. Because as sinners, and this is what we were talking about today in Sunday school, and I love how this keeps coming back, and I know y'all are probably like, why does this man keep talking about Sunday school when we weren't here? But at least I'm repeating it. So, and some of you can jump back to Sunday school and think about it. Right there, we're talking about the wrath of God. The wrath of God is upon sinners. The wrath of God is on the ungodly and the wicked. We see that all throughout the Old Testament. Guess what? It's right here in the New Testament. God does not change in the New Testament. It's the same God of the Old Testament. So if you live your life in wickedness, if you live your life in sin, if you have continued to go your own way, continue to put your own gods ahead of God, be careful. Don't go down that road. Because you're going to find at the end of it, if you put yourself first and you rely on yourself to get through this, you're just going to see the wrath of God. But through Jesus Christ, what happens through that and the crucifixion is that as we continue to see that picture, we continue to see Jesus Christ on the cross, what you begin to recognize is even when you continue to go your own way, God still loved you. God still cared about you. Because in order for God to be perfect, if he set these rules and he set these examples, they have to be fulfilled in order for us to actually make it, because that's what he established. But the thing is, though, in order for us to be with God, we must fulfill the requirements of the law. But the problem is we continue to see it's not possible. So God has to make a way for it to be possible. And he does that through Jesus Christ. You see, Jesus Christ actually fulfilled the law. Jesus Christ actually did what you could not do. And because of that, There's someone who can. There's someone who did. But the importance is that whenever the time came, instead of being able to get whatever he should have gotten because he actually obeyed God's law perfectly, he did. He ended up going on the cross. He ended up dying. He ended up experiencing the wrath of God. And he was resurrected 3 days later to show that he is God. And everything that he was saying up to that point is true and factual. And you can take it to the bank, so to speak. But everything he experienced on that cross and that wrath that he received from God is what you should experience because of what you've done in your life, your sin. The times you put other things above God. The times that you put other things that mattered more than God himself. The times that you've completely ignored everything God said. The times that you say, you know what, I may not even see God. You may not even care. But all those things in your past, and as you continue to move forward, and as you continue to grow, and as you continue to want to know more of God, and you begin to learn how to put him first, all those sins in your past are gone. Because the wrath God has for them is now on Jesus Christ. The wrath God has is now completely on Jesus. And now, instead of it being on you, God has the pleasure of seeing you as he sees Jesus Christ when he lived that perfect life. The requirements that you were supposed to meet, the requirements that you needed in order to have a relationship with God, Jesus met. And when we have our faith in Jesus Christ, that's what we receive. The pleasure that God has for his Son. You see, this is the gospel. And today, as we end up wrapping up, as I am about to go in prayer and finish this, I say this. Because this right here is the whole purpose of living. This is why we live for God, and if we get this wrong, what does any other wrong matter? If you haven't actually trusted in Jesus Christ, if you haven't trusted him with that salvation, to know that he is finishing that bridge so that you can actually have a relationship with God, so you can actually know God, you can talk to him. I just urge you, before I go into prayer today, and I'm going to give a break before I go into it too, to talk to him, pray to him, to recognize the fact that, you know what, you do put things first. And just ask him to help you put him first. Ask him to see how great of a God he is. Ask him to show you who he is, that you can love him, that you can continue to love him more, even when we fail. Because if it was not for Jesus Christ, we wouldn't even have that ability. We'd be going down a road of recklessness. We'd be going down a road just headed for wrath. But it was only by Jesus Christ and God's grace and mercy do we even have the ability to talk with him, to plead with him, to ask for forgiveness, to ask to see who he is, and to ask to love him more. So I'm going to start praying, but right before I start praying, I'm going to give a time of silence. Talk to God for yourself. Whatever that may look like. If you're a Christian, if you've been a Christian for a long time, ask God to show more of himself. Ask God to help you love him more. And for those of you who aren't a Christian, ask him to see how. Ask him to say, Lord, how can I love you more? How can I care about you more? How can I put more faith in you and my salvation in Jesus Christ? Let me pray. Father, I thank you for this morning. thank you as a sinner, as someone who's broken, to know that I can actually call upon you, to talk to you, to ask you for help. Thank you for your mercy and your grace, and to know that my salvation, my ability to make it to heaven does not depend upon my ability. It depends all upon Jesus Christ, all upon what you've done, knowing that that will stand and whatever I try to do will not. Lord, your name is the only name that matters. Your name is the only one that will last, and your name is the only one that provides us with true wisdom. I pray for these people. I pray that each and every day you give them more of you, you show them more of you, that you help them grow as a Christian, as a follower of you, to know that you are God, you are Lord, and that apart from you is foolishness. Apart from you is pointless. Lord, only you know where the hearts of these people are. Lord, I pray that their hearts are flesh, their hearts have been made new, that their eyes have been opened, and that they see the importance of who you are, of why you matter, and the glory you deserve. You have made everything around us. You have made this universe. You have made everything that we know of today, even the things we don't know of. You've made us, and you've made me. And yet, every day, when you've made me and you've made each and every one of us, we put things ahead of you. We put things and we see them in that moment as more important, Lord. And I just ask that you help us see that. You help us push it to the side, and you focus our eyes and our heart on what does matter. That you show us how to love like Jesus loved. You show us how to care like Jesus cared. And you show us how to share your word like Jesus did. That as we leave here, that we're not just another person. We're not just a sinner, but we are, as the Bible puts it, through Christ a saint. And that we share the love that we have for you to all the people we see, that they too might come to know the wisdom and the knowledge and the truth of what the gospel has to say. That, Lord, that's all that matters. Lord, I pray and ask all this in your name.